Welcome to 701 Civics, the show that seeks to provide listeners with a greater understanding of state and local government in North Dakota. I'm your host, former social studies teacher Brian Pechtel, and I hope you'll join me as we learn together by visiting with a variety of elected officials and leaders throughout the state about the role of state and local government in the everyday lives of North Dakotans. All right, and again, joining me today is former Governor Ed Schafer, who I'm very excited to visit with. You were one of my first elections that I got to vote in back in 1992, so kind of exciting. It's wouldn't have guessed that I'd be visiting with you today. So thank you for taking time.
Well, it's great to be with you, Brian. But if you were one of the first times to vote, it tells you like how old I am here.
Yeah, and how old I'm getting. So I appreciate that. So again, just to talk a little bit about the governor's office, I visited with a number of state officials on their positions and kind of what sets those offices apart. So just to go back to when you were running for office, what ultimately motivated you to seek that office in North Dakota, and how did you decide that it was the right time to do so?
What motivated me was an effort when I thought government wasn't doing really well, both in the national and state level. I come from the business world, and I'm saying, why don't business people run for office?
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're administrators, they're managers, they're skilled things to me that could be used in the government process, but nobody does. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of exploring that and complaining to a lot of my friends that business people should get involved in things. And finally, someone said, well, maybe you should do something about that instead of just talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I started thinking about, well, okay, can you can't run government like a business for sure,
Yeah.
but can you transfer business skills of administration, of management, of budgeting? Can you transfer those skills to operate government in that arena? And that's what I started talking about, which then led to my campaign, which was Schafer Means Business. And use that in a lot of different nuances, but it was a thing to say, how can we um, my motivation, my effort was saying, I want to transfer those business skills because I think we can make government better.
Right. Um, what was the most challenging aspect of campaigning then? Not having been in public office before.
The most challenging thing for me was being an outsider. I had to do two things. One was when I decided to run, I had to figure out, am I a Democrat or am I a Republican? I hadn't been involved. My parents were strong Republicans and active Republicans. I didn't know if that meant I should be a Republican or maybe I shouldn't be since they were. So I had to go through all of that and say, am I or am I not? And kind of what's a Republican, what's a Democrat, what do they stand for? Had to do a lot of soul searching for what are my own personal core values, how those matched against the policies and directions and values of the parties, and then said, okay, this is the party that I want to represent that I think best works for me. None of them are perfect, of course, but one of the things I found out, I think that was really important, is both parties are necessary. Both parties are good. Both parties have, and independent too, but the values and the philosophies that are put forth by both parties are good things.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a good and a bad thing. This is like what just represents your own personal values the best.
Yeah.
So I decided to run the Republican ticket, but I wasn't active in the Republican Party. So people were saying, "Well, who are you, and who do you think you are?" And what
Mm-hmm.
seeking the nomination for the party, I had two opponents, both of whom were elected Republican officials and have been active in the party forever. So I was kind of the odd person out here, and really nobody knew what that was going to be all about.
Sure. But you had campaigned 2 years earlier, correct? For the U.S. House.
I had, yeah, actually, I in 1988 or 4 years earlier,
Okay.
I had was a field director for a House candidate, for a
Okay.
U.S. House candidate. So I was out campaigning for another person, but I really learned a lot being out on the campaign trail, representing a candidate, speaking engagements and things. my first political speeches were pretty bad, but having having been out there on the campaign trail really gives you knowledge about how it works and meeting people and how to get involved or whatever. So then when I ran for the House, I didn't particularly want to go to Washington D.C. Not at all. I didn't want to go to Washington D.C.
Hmm.
But our Republican Party couldn't find a candidate. The Democratic Party had controlled the state house for 40 years. We had trouble getting candidates. I was the chairman of the candidate recruitment committee for the
Hmm.
party, so I ended up being the candidate.
Okay.
So what it did, well, I mean, not that I didn't run the election, but what it really did was my mission there was to run a competitive campaign, but really to do a setup on running for governor. And that's what I
Sure.
wanted to do. That's what I felt I needed to do. But so you put together the team, you put together supporters in every district, you put together the technology to be able to do what you want. You just get all that put in place. So then when it came time to run for governor, um, I was ready to go, even though I was the outsider and not involved in the party. I had been involved enough and had set up the organization strong enough so I was able to go in, having started with a third in the field of three to get the nomination. I ended up being able to get that nomination because of the work we had done 2 years earlier.
Sure. And I would argue your campaign is probably one of the best first modern campaigns. It was very positive, very uplifting. I remember watching the ads on TV and seeing those, and you did focus on business quite a bit.
Well,
Um,
it was a good time in North Dakota. It was time for change.
mhm.
Things hadn't been going well at the state level. The economy was in a bad place. Agriculture and energy both had tanked,
Mhm.
and weird things were just out of whack. So it was, and typically in that time, Brian, you end up with doom and gloom. Everything's awful. Everything's bad, and this and that. And
Right.
we came in and said, "Hey, we can be good. We can fix it.
Mhm.
We can do good things." And so it was a high impact, high energy, and fun and happy campaign, which made a lot of difference.
Sure. What was the best part about campaigning in a statewide office?
Um, the best part for me is I'm a people person, and I
Mhm.
love being out there. You're on Main Street, you're in businesses, you're on farms, you're in the elevators and the supermarkets, talking to people, and that's what I really, really appreciated because people were open and honest, and you learned. I mean, it was like, what do you want? What are you thinking? What's not working? What is working? What can you do to help? Kind of thing. And I love that, and it's something that we continued on when I was elected and we were in office. We started a program called Capital for the Day,
Mhm.
and Capital for the Day, we took the whole governor's office, all the staff, took the cabinet, everybody out to a community once a month and spent the day in the community. And
Mhm.
it was the cabinet officials went to their respective uh, uh, areas of concentration. The human service people went to the hospitals and the clinics and the things, and the corrections people went to the jails, and that kind of stuff. But then in the afternoon, we had a open community forum with an open mic, and we stayed there and we answered every question and every thought, got some great ideas. But it was that connection with people that I really, really appreciated, and was so much fun for me because that's what you're supposed to be there for, is representing the people. And so that interaction with people
Mhm.
all over the state was just the best part of the campaign.
Yeah. So once you get into office, how does a governor prioritize your goals while balancing those needs of the state?
Well, we did two things. We said, how are we going to operate? What are the tenets of the office? Well, how are we going to measure things? How are we going to operate? How are we going to present ourselves? So we put together four tenets of saying you represent all the people all the time. You're campaigning representing a party, but when you
Hmm.
get in that office, you represent everybody. So represent all the people all the time. We said we're going to tell the truth, good or bad, like it or not. We're going to tell the truth. We're going to do the right thing. That's not always happening in government, but we're going to do the right thing.
Hmm.
And um, lastly, we said we're going to solve the problem.
Hmm.
Government often likes to kick the can down the road, just, nibble around the edges, don't get too extreme out there, don't really solve the problem. We're going to solve the problems. So that's how we're going to operate. Then what we did was we said, during the campaign, we presented to the people these policies that we would represent: the economy, taxes, education, those kinds of things. So we had to take those policies and translate them into position papers for us, what they meant for the campaign. Then you go into a legislative session, and where you develop that policy, then
Hmm.
we had to incorporate the legislative actions and directions and mesh them on top of what our policy directions are going to be, and work with the legislature to put the good pieces of both sides of that together, which wasn't always easy,
Hmm.
but put that together for the policy to give the best direction coming out of the legislative session for the state.
Yeah. And the governor's office in North Dakota kind of is, in one sense, constitutionally weak compared to some other states because they don't get to appoint a whole lot of positions, say like the attorney general or anything else. Um, so, how does the governor? Is it just strictly through really working with that legislative body to shape that economic future?
Well, and that's an issue that we talk about a lot because that constitutionally weak governor,
Hmm.
I don't believe in. I
Hmm.
think the governor's office is very strong. You have the direction of the people from the governor's office, and that's the strongest part you can have in the office. So, when we would interact with the legislature, if I felt they were going in the wrong direction, of course, you have the veto power. I mean,
Hmm.
they can put some stuff together in a veto power. I made it very clear in the beginning of the session that this is where we were going, this is what we need to do, and that I wouldn't be much interested in things, that weren't going to be there. So that's pretty powerful message.
Hmm.
But the other thing that it's with the trite phrase, but the power of the people
Hmm.
is I went to legislative forums. I went to communities. I went to, this is proposed legislation. What does it mean? Why would you support that and not the governor's position? And so I interacted with the people in a legislative way, which really made a difference in my strength in dealing with the legislature for two reasons. One is I understood where the legislature was going. But secondly, I could say to the people, hey, you should support our position, not the legislature. And the people rose, the people would call their legislators and say, do this. So I think plus, having a hand on the purse, on the
Hmm.
budget, I think personally that you have a lot of strength in the governor's office to manage and direct that policy direction for the state.
Yeah. Well, the governor now has the luxury, if you will, of having a supermajority really in both houses. You didn't quite have that luxury, still had majorities. Um, do you think the governor, within the party, it seems like there's some different directions it wants to go. Um, Today, does that make it more challenging for the governor, being they're all supposed to be, under the same party?
Yeah, from the political perspective,
Hmm.
um, I'm not sure that it is an advantage having everything in one party.
Right.
Um, when my first session, we had the Democrats controlled the Senate and the Republicans controlled the House with just 10-seat majority.
Hmm.
And so you had a chance, and I had mentioned earlier, both sides are good. Both sides have good ideas. Both sides are important at certain times. Things have to, or certain situations you want to do, maybe more Democratic philosophy or more Republican philosophy and things. So when you had the two houses in separate parties, you had a chance to mix better. You had better discourse. You had a better opportunity to say, well, that's a good idea, but it doesn't work. This and that, and it was not an inter-party fight. And
Hmm.
what we have today as Republicans is being in supermajority on both sides is two things. One is they can just kind of steamroller whatever they want,
Hmm.
But which is never a good idea, and and because you take the eye off the people. I mean, we're there to represent people, and when you're
Sure.
there just representing the party, that doesn't work so well.
Hmm.
But the other thing is, you always have difference of opinion. You always have some people that are pro-choice and pro-life. You always have some people who are spenders and savers.
Mm.
You always have some difference. And when you have the different parties, it's easier to sort that out. When it's inter-party, then it's Republicans fighting with each other. And
Hmm.
then Republicans are bad, or Republicans can't get their act together, or Republicans don't govern well. So it does cause some image problems and directional problems with the population. So we today Republicans are suffering under that because we've been in power a long time. We've got supermajority. The Democrats really don't have a voice or any power of a voice. So it is all inter-party fights and inter-party
Hmm.
difficulties and personalities that in the public don't always look so great.
Yeah. And that was one of the kind of the question, how that political landscape has changed from when you first entered politics. Um, Certainly, there's much more ability of the people to make their voice known. But yeah, it just doesn't seem like it's happened at the ballot box for a broader perspective, perhaps.
Well, it's the pendulum always swings in the political arena,
Right.
and so a political party gets in power. And I had mentioned before I was elected governor that Democrats had controlled the state house for 40 years in North Dakota,
Hmm.
and and sometimes you get there to be too long. And when you get there to when you get there over a long period of time, your focus changes to you and not the people, and
Hmm.
and it changes to your own political philosophy and not a blend of good political philosophy for public policy. So you get there too far. Well, people correct that. People say that we're going to throw all the Republicans out and we're going to go back to the Democrats because we don't like the direction of our government, and that pendulum swings back,
Hmm.
or a bell curve if you want to look at it that way. So my attempt when we were elected is to say this is going to happen. I mean, this is the political cycle that's going to be there. Our job is to build trust in Republican leadership as strong and as long as we can to either flatten out that bell curve or keep that pendulum going a little longer. But
Hmm.
we've seen the results of that over time here in North Dakota, because now we have trusted Republican leadership, and people are voting that way.
Hmm. So what are some strategies that you use to collaborate with some of those members of opposing party or people within the party who may not have, been on board with all of your policies?
I think one of the advantages I had was lessons learned about
Hmm.
when I studied the reasons, or when I studied the political parties to see where I belonged.
Hmm.
I really had the opportunity to learn about the political parties and what they stood for. So what that meant to me when you're negotiating or when you're talking to someone else with different ideas is I can say you're not wrong, you're not bad,
Hmm.
you're not. This isn't an issue. I mean, we have difference of opinion, but really the differences of opinion are sometimes shaped by different philosophy. In other words, often the Democrat Party or a democratic philosophy is short term. I got a problem, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to fix it right now. And
Hmm.
if it causes another problem, then we'll just fix that problem in the future. Republicans tend to look more long term and say, yeah, well, we need to fix it, but maybe we need to do this first, or that has a different ramification, so we change it. So I was able to visit with people to say, okay, we have a common goal of fixing the problem. How are we going to do it? You see it this way, I see it that way, but that doesn't mean that you're bad or wrong. It just means we need to fix a problem. What's the best way? So that
Hmm.
was very helpful. The other thing that really made a difference is I met with them. I met with the opposition. I had breakfast once a month with the opposition leaders. We talked about legislation, what I could support and what I couldn't, and what their concerns were and what they were trying to accomplish, and how how we could incorporate that into good public policy, and not worry about whether it's a Republican philosophy or Democratic philosophy. It's public policy here. What's the best for the people? So we kept that in focus, and that really made a lot of difference.
Well, coupled with that, what was maybe one of your, what do you consider some of the most challenging decisions that you had to make that you thought, well, maybe people aren't going to like this, but I still need to get this through?
Well, I think the hardest thing is when we got into office, when we arrived in the Capitol, the economy was awful. The revenue, the government was overspent, the revenues weren't there. And what was happening is that my predecessor governor had to, at the end of the last two bienniums, he had to go in and allocate funds because he didn't have enough money. I mean, there
Hmm.
wasn't enough money coming in to pay for the budget that was put forth by the legislature. So, um, not being enough money said you don't have enough revenue.
Hmm.
Well, our effort on one side was to say we've got to figure out how to balance that budget. Um, on the other side, we had to say we need to stimulate the economy so that we get more revenues. And
Hmm.
the philosophy was like, government doesn't create the economy; private sector business investment creates the economy. And so, what are we going to do to incentivize the business sector to move forward so we can increase activity and get more revenues? So we're saying we don't have enough revenue already. We're going to cut budgets to try to balance that, and that's tough.
Hmm.
I mean, nobody, every expenditure, everything there is good and needed, etc. So we had to come in and say, we're coming in with a 97% budget, and we're going to have to figure out how to do that. On one hand, on the other hand, we said on the revenue side, we said we need to cut some taxes. We need to reduce some taxes and regulations in the business community to get them invest in our country. So I had to go to the people of North Dakota and say, by the way, we don't have enough revenue, but we need to cut revenue to get this going. If you look at it on a long-term basis,
Hmm.
that's it was a tough message. It was hard. People, don't people don't like people don't like cutting programs, and they
Sure.
don't like increased taxes. you know
Hmm.
and so we would say, well, we're not going to increase your taxes, we got that one covered. But cutting programs are hard, and
Hmm.
so we had to go in and prioritize expenditures, and we said education, safety, and health are our important missions for the people of North Dakota. We're going to focus our money there, and we're going to figure out underneath that where best we can make some reductions in costs. So that was tough. Of course, decisions outside of the legislative session.
Hmm.
Um, I think we had in the 8 years I was in office, we had 10 presidential disasters in North Dakota. My
Hmm.
opponents always said I was a disaster, but federally declared disasters, and managing uh, difficult times in people's lives are hard.
Hmm.
And you're making decisions that affects people's lives and their health and their longevity and things, and those things weigh on you. You carry around those on your shoulders. But so there's good news and bad news. There's hard things and good things, but you
Hmm.
tackle them. And I've always had the I don't know what it is, ability to face those issues straight on and say, okay, how can we fix it?
Sure. So going from that to walking away from the governorship, arguably you could have won a third term. Um, and I think people would have, a lot of folks were hoping you would, and you just said no thanks. You just seemed to walk away. How did you come to that determination?
It was 6 months of conversation with my spouse Nancy.
Hmm.
We talked about it all the time. She would take one side and I would take the other, and then we'd swap, and the pros and cons. Both our dads were ill, and one of the things that you find out when you're in these offices, you get very isolated. You get, you know, distance between friends and family. Um, you just don't have the time to spend with them. So, we were looking at both our dads being ill, but I think um, the momentum to run again is very strong.
Hmm.
You have unfinished business. You owe it to the party. People want you to run again. I mean, all those are there. And I think Nancy had the most profound comment in this whole thing. Is she said, if we run for another term, at the end of that term, the very same things we're discussing now are going to be on the table then. so,
Hmm.
when do you make the decision, now or then? And for us, the best thing to do is not to seek that third term. The other thing that I'm thinking about here as we're talking that was important in our conversation is the longer we're in office, the farther you get away from the people.
Hmm.
And that is, I mean, it's just a fact. And when you're running for office, you're interacting, you're asking people, you're talking to people, and this and that. You kind of get a sense for what you're on. When you're governor and you walk into the auto dealership and talk to the service manager and say, what are people talking about?
Hmm.
It's like, oh, the governor's here. It's
Yeah,
not like
sure.
telling you what the people are talking about.
Hmm.
So you do get that, even though we really had a lot of attention to try to stay connected with people. There is that factor. The longer you're there, the farther you do get away from the people. And I was real intent on engaging with people and being part of it. And that was part of the effort too. Is you can be in these things too long if you're going to represent the people all the time, which we wanted to do.
Just a quick compare and contrast with working at the federal level. Of course, you're the Secretary of Agriculture for the last year of President Bush's term. How is that different to being a governor?
Well, I think personally, we ought to have a constitutional amendment saying that you have to be a governor before you can be a cabinet member. Because um, being in the cabinet is just awesome. I
Hmm.
mean, being in the leadership of the United States of America is something that is very rare and something that is very honorable, and
Hmm.
it's just huge. Um, Agriculture, I think, being at the United States Department of Agriculture was a real blessing because it's 107,000 farm kids, and
Hmm.
they're rural and they know how to work and they respond. And if they don't have the job done at 5 o'clock, their car is still in the parking lot at 6. That department is different than a lot of them in Washington. So my view is from USDA, and it's wonderful. It's the governor's office is important as a learning tool because it's different departments, different agencies, different constituents, different vendors, and so you in the governor's office you're dealing with all of that, and with all the different elements of a governor's office. So you translate that to the secretary's office, and you got a leg up in dealing with all that. But really, um, it was it was a tremendous experience, and mostly it was just bigger numbers.
Hmm.
Everything we dealt with in the governor's office, you dealt with in the secretary's office, but it was just bigger. you know? And of course, you have the opportunity at USDA, which is an international department. We had 90 foreign offices, so you're representing the United States all over the world, and you have a chance to travel all over the world and say, I'm here representing the United States of America in the World Hunger seminar or program that we had going on in 2008. I mean, it just is, it's just an awesome opportunity. But really, as far as being different or more challenging, or search more challenging than the governor's office. But it really, when you boil it down, the elements are all the same. You're representing the people, you're delivering public policy, you're interacting with people to help make their lives better. And at USDA, we always said we affect everybody's life every day,
Hmm.
and you do.
Yeah. So, last couple questions. What advice would you give someone who is considering to run for governor to meet those demands?
Yes, Do it. that's no, seriously. I mean, public service is awesome, and I really, people said you shouldn't run. People told me I couldn't run, and I
Mhm,
wasn't involved. Or you got to start somewhere, run for Secretary of State or something first, or you just can't jump into these things. But the the advice I have is, you have to know yourself.
mhm,
What do you stand for? What does it mean to you? What are your values? What's your character? What do you stand for? um, how does that fit the office? The
mhm,
office has certain requirements, certain needs. The executive branch, the legislative branch, whatever, running for governor in the executive branch, of course, is that important knowledge of yourself and how it fits. Um, I think it's important to study communications. The whole process really is trying to absorb what people are thinking and wanting and wondering about, and taking that kind of internally and then kind of projecting it back out, that's understandable to people and how it fits with the policy you're putting forward. Communications is huge, and then work on that personality. Interpersonal skills are the
mhm.
biggest thing you can put on the table.
Yeah. And you've never written a book on any of your experiences, any of your time in office, correct?
I haven't. I
How
haven't.
come?
Well, I'm kind of, I don't look back. I
Mhm.
don't take notes. I don't keep journals. So I'm kind of like, today's today, and I'm going to work for tomorrow.
Sure.
And I just never have. I kind of, my governor friends, are all writing memoirs or books or something like that, and I kind of think about it once in a while. And I've been doing a couple podcasts
Mhm.
with some of the philosophy or direction. We're trying to put together a thing called Ed Talks.
Okay.
That instead of TED Talks,
Mhm.
we have some Ed Talks about just various aspects of campaigning and philosophy and developing public policy and things like that based on my experiences. Um, I'm not sure anybody's interested, but it's kind of fun to reflect on it.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, I saw you that you were just testifying, I think a little week and a half ago or so at the Capitol. Um,
Yeah, and matter of fact, I had a call with one of the legislative leaders this morning about testifying on a piece of legislation, and Nancy goes, "I thought you were, I thought you were retired from this stuff." But
just like The
it's
Godfather, they're going to pull you back in.
well, you just when you get involved in it and you make a commitment to public policy, you just never get away from it.
Sure, sure. Well, Governor, I really appreciate you taking time, especially with the technical issues we had before we started. It's a real treat for me. I think the listeners will also enjoy your perspectives and from your time in office. So thank you so much for visiting today.
It's great to be with you, and it's fun to talk civics.
You bet. Thank you.